Taika Waititi's Jojo Rabbit takes a comedic look at Adolf Hitler. I'm Zach Wells of Gold Derby, and with me now is Michael Giacchino. He's the film's composer. And Michael, I have to wonder, this is not the first time that we've seen a comedic look at Adolf Hitler. But what's so interesting about this movie is that it combines so many different tones. I mean, it's about childhood. It's about World War II. It's got some romance. It's got some comedy. Was the first time you read the script, or saw the film, and were you kind of unsure about how to capture all those different tones musically?
You know what? I wasn't. The thing for me was I knew at its core what the film was about. I knew what the important story was. And for me, my job, I only wanted to concentrate on that important part of the story, which was the idea about this little boy who begins his journey with a worldview that is very narrow. And by the end of the film, it is a much wider worldview, and opened his eyes to really sort of what is going on, what is right, what is just, and what is happening around him. As a kid, you're used to sort of only being preoccupied with what's directly in front of you. Anything outside that circle, not interested in. And so for him to kind of grow in a very short period of time to understand more about what is happening in the world, that's something most kids don't have to deal with. But it certainly is something kids in that time period had to experience. So for me, I just wanted to focus on that. The funny elements, the comedy, that speaks for itself, and that can be on its own. But I just wanted to be about sort of the emotional aspect, the backbone of the film.
I guess it helps when you've got somebody like Taika Waititi, writing and directing and starring in it. You don't really have to do a lot to bump up the comedy elements,
no,
I suppose. In terms of capturing that emotion and that emotional arc for the character, what were some of your initial ideas musically for different themes and things like that?
Well, the first thing was writing the main theme for the film, which is JoJo's theme, and one of the things I wanted to try and do with the film, which was to illustrate musically how you can go from one point of view to another point of view through the course of a story. And the film opens with these young boys singing this German march, which is JoJo's theme. And if you read the lyrics at the beginning of the film, you'd probably think, you know what, that's a little creepy. I don't believe in this. These lyrics sort of speak to fascism and all of the horrors that you're used to sort of associating with World War II. But because everything is about perception and point of view and how we look at it and how it's presented to us, if you were to read those same lyrics by the end of the movie, when JoJo is sort of surrounded by war and everything is falling apart around him, those same exact lyrics with the sheen of fascism wiped away actually mean something good, and they're all about tolerance and acceptance and love and support. So again, it's how people can take words and twist them to their own personal gain. We see this happening all the time right now. It's all about people taking words and twisting them for their own personal gain, and people just blindly believing them. And I feel like that is exactly what was going on at the time. So my I wanted to try and do that musically. And the lyrics that were written for the film were written by a really wonderful lyricist and composer herself, but her name is Elisa Samsel. And it was about, again, creating that idea that these words are all about who speaks them to you, who is speaking these words to you, and how you're going to interpret them.
It's interesting you bring up the way that these words can be twisted and color our perceptions of things, and certainly like the movie, as you said, it's about like how this kid's worldview changes and how basically everything that we know as children are things that told to us, by adults. And
that's right. So
talk a little bit about thematically, going off of that, right? What were different instruments or motifs or things that you used to try to get the audience into JoJo's perceptions?
Well, I think for me, it's always, especially in a film like this, you want to be as simple as possible, and this was not a film that had a 110-piece orchestra like I'm normally using on most of the things I do. This was a film that had a 35-piece orchestra, and it had a recorder ensemble matched with a string quintet, matched with 2 guitar players and a piano player and some weird percussion instruments, and a small brass section. And it was sort of an odd little setup, but I feel like it really spoke to who Jojo was and how he kind of saw the world at the time. And the more intimate you can be in an sort of an epically emotional story like this, I feel like the better off you are. Sometimes when a story is as emotional as this one is, films have a tendency to sort of over-emote and over-explain. And many times through music, they get very pushy and sweeping, and it's not really what it's about. I find that the most emotional moments in your life are the quieter ones, the ones where not everyone is yelling, not everyone is screaming. The music isn't pushing to say everything. I feel like it's all about being quiet. So in dealing with characters such as Rosie or Elsa, it was sometimes as simple as just a simple harp playing very gently and not getting in the way of what they're talking about. Because that music is only there to underline the subtext of what they're talking about. The moment I get too interested in what I'm doing as a musician, then I failed. It could ruin the whole film. So I was always making sure I was listening to what the story was saying and never overstepping any bounds, trying not to make sure I didn't step on what was already there, emotionally.
Did you try to musically differentiate the different relationships in the film that Jojo has? I mean, in other words, like, his relationships with Hitler, his relationships with his mother, his relationship with the young Jewish girl.
Yeah, I mean, there was a certain amount of that, and some of it was done just through instrumentation choices. But I feel like, Jojo had his theme, which changes quite a bit throughout the movie in terms of how it's presented or played. The notes are always the same, but the how you dress it up is always different, and that creates different colors, which create different emotional aspects. Jojo's mother, Rosie, has her own theme, which is shared with Elsa. Elsa and Rosie share the same theme, and the thought behind that was that, Elsa leaves this movie with everything that Rosie taught her. She leaves this movie with everything Rosie imparted on her, but she doesn't leave with Rosie. So all she takes is the knowledge and the love and the support and the empathy that Rosie had for her. So Rosie's theme eventually becomes Elsa's theme by the end of this film. And it's one of those ideas of just, what are we passing on to the people around us? What are we giving to the people around us who need something? And I like to think that Elsa took all the good in that Rosie was trying to do, and we'll move forward in the world with that to continue, that for her. You
mentioned how this score is kind of different from some of the larger orchestrations you've done. I mean, you've done a lot of movies like Star Trek movies, Planet of the Apes movies, and things like that. Well, I mean, what's more difficult to do as a composer? Is it more difficult to do those kind of sweeping scores, or is it more difficult to do these kind of more intimate, emotional things?
I think they're all difficult. They're all fighting their own. They're all difficult. They're all, the process is always the same. You're always trying to write for you're finding the truth in the storytelling and the truth in the character motivations, the truth and all of that. Like, when I'm writing music, I can't just write. I don't just look at a scene and go, oh, I see someone crying, so that means this is a sad scene, so I'm just going to write some sad music. But I think it's sad music. For me, it's always about writing, what I'm feeling. So in order for me to write sad music, I have to feel sad. The movie has to work on a certain level to get me to feel that way. And then I can do it. I think it's the only way to make it work for the audience is to be as, honest as you can with what you're writing and what you're saying. Because if you're not, audiences are smart, you're not going to fool them, and they're not going to believe it. So I'm very careful about the films I work on and the people I work with. And because I know that if I'm in a situation where I have to pretend to be something, it's not going to go well. I'm not real good at that. They're all the process is very similar from film to film. The budgets may be different, the size of the orchestra may be different, but the goal is always the same, and that's to be honest about what you're feeling when you're writing.
Well, you have worked with a lot of really great people, including Taika Waititi. Working with somebody like that, I mean, what does he give you as a director that helps you, find the right notes, find the right music for the moment?
I think he felt the same way I did about the movie in terms of just making sure that whatever we're watching, whatever we're feeling is in line with the story he wanted to tell. There was a time I remember when I first got hired on The Incredibles, Brad Bird said to me, he goes, "Now listen, your music could ruin my movie." And and I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Listen, if you and I are not on the same page every step of the way, then the audience is going to start thinking things we don't want them to think, and then our story falls apart. So we have to pay attention to each other and always make sure that we're hand in hand in terms of the storytelling." And I think, Taika was the same way. It was all about making sure that what I was doing was supporting the story he wanted to tell, and that we were there constantly double checking, triple checking everything we were doing. Because, this was a very delicate story to tell, and it could have gone south in many, many ways. But I think because of everyone was so concentrating on the fact to make sure that it stayed as honest and truthful as possible, that we were able to do that. It is certainly one of my favorite movies I've ever worked on. I love it. It's definitely one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. And even if I didn't work on the movie, I probably would still have it in top 10 as well. I just think he did a great job, and it's nice to see someone with such a different point of view tackle a story like this.
Well, was there a piece of music that was particularly difficult for you to write? And I mean, if you have those situations, how do you work through them?
Well, most of the difficulty comes from in a film like this is the subject matter. It's very difficult to deal with, and when you're writing or working on a film, you have to watch it over and over and over again. So you're forcing yourself to kind of relive these emotional moments over and over and over again, which is very exhausting at times. It's like being an actor to some extent. You have to take on sort of the role of this person in order to really, truly get the truth out. But, there's the scene in the center of the movie, which I don't want to say too much about because I don't want to give it away. But there is this sort of like incredibly emotional moment in the film where Jojo sort of is faced with the final truth of what is going on around him, and that to me that was a difficult scene to do. It was a difficult tightrope to walk to make sure we weren't overstating anything, and just letting what was there speak for itself, and just giving it the slightest bit of help to make sure that it landed in the right way.
I think I know exactly the scene you're talking about, and I don't want to give it away, but I'll say it hit me like a ton of bricks when I was watching the movie. So I think you did your job effectively in that regard. I wanted to ask you a couple of awards questions before I let you go. First off, you are an Oscar winner for Up. You were also nominated for Ratatouille, another Brad Bird movie. What did that recognition mean for you to win that Oscar and to get that nomination for Ratatouille?
Well, I mean, I think what it really means is the people that you admire, the people that make films around you, the people that you're always looking up to, that was a moment where they were sort of just patting you on the back and saying, "You know what, good job. We approve." And that's a nice thing because, you always in this business, sometimes you feel like you're alone and you're just there looking at all the people around you that you admire and you love their work. And so when something like that happens, it's a nice reminder that, everyone is sort of looking out for each other, looking at what everyone else is doing. And we still enjoy each other's work. We still can do that, which I love because there's so much work being done out there that I absolutely love. And it's fun to not lose the fan side of what I do, not lose the side of me that grew up loving these things and being excited by them. And I grew up watching the Oscars, that was always a really fun thing to do. And I would always get upset when the movies I loved didn't win, but that's the way it is. It was still the fun of seeing all those creative people in one place. And I think that was that was the most interesting thing, most sort of important thing about it for me.
You've also got an Emmy win for your work on Lost, which of course, and you worked on everything from the pilot to the very end. That was something that you won very early on in your career. How did that help give you a boost, number one? And also, having worked on a show that is beloved by so many people, what does that mean for you?
Well, I think, the award itself is just sort of a reminder that the choices you made were good. You know, you did okay. You're always second guessing yourself when you're writing this stuff. It can be very, interesting process. But, something like that happens, then you're like reminded, oh, okay, so I made some good choices. It seemed to have worked out. People liked it, and that makes me very happy. In terms of Lost, that's an important project for me. It's one of my favorite things I've worked on as well, and the global sort of like love of that show is incredible. When I'll do every once in a while, I'll do a Lost concert, and what amazes me is people come from all over the world for these things. Now, I might do it just for one night here in LA, and people come from Japan, they come from Africa, they come from, everywhere you can imagine they come from. And it just shows you how important it is to people. And if you imagine if one person or two people come from Japan, there must be thousands of others who wish they could have come for it, So it's important, and it's fun to be able to continue to share sort of like that love of the show through its music and being able to go out and do these concerts. And many of the actors come to the concerts as well because and they participate on stage with me, and it just was a very special experience for so many people. We really all made some friends that we will be friends for life.
Well, I think you've definitely made something again that's going to be good for decades to come. Michael, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on your work.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Great talking with you too. And thanks to all you at home for watching. Make sure you click the like and subscribe button below, and make sure you visit us at goldderby.com for all the latest Oscar news.